Hi everyone. My name is Dr. Thorne, and before we begin, I want you to think back to last night, or maybe this morning. That leftover container you pulled out of the fridge, popped in the microwave, and ate without a second thought. I want you to stop doing that, at least for 4 specific foods. In my years of practice, I've seen patients walk in with stomach pain, nausea, even serious poisoning, and when we trace it back, the culprit isn't some exotic illness. It's dinner, reheated again, and eaten without a second thought. Here's the truth nobody tells you. Reheating food isn't always the safe, harmless shortcut we think it is. Some foods, once cooked and cooled, undergo chemical and bacterial changes that heat alone cannot undo. In fact, in some cases, reheating doesn't kill the danger, it feeds it. Today, I'm going to walk you through 4 foods sitting in your fridge right now that you should never reheat, and I'm going to explain medically exactly why. This isn't about scare tactics. It's about understanding your body, your food, and the invisible risks hiding in your everyday routine. By the end of this talk, you'll never look at your leftovers the same way again. Let's begin. Let's talk about rice. It seems harmless, doesn't it? It's bland, it's comforting, it's the base of 1,000 meals across nearly every culture on Earth. And yet, in my clinical experience, rice is one of the most quietly dangerous foods you can reheat. Here's what most people don't know. Raw rice can carry spores of a bacterium called Bacillus cereus. These spores are incredibly hardy. They survive the cooking process. Boiling, steaming, even pressure cooking does not kill them. They simply go dormant, waiting. Now here's where the real danger begins. Once rice is cooked, if it's left sitting out at room temperature, on the counter, in a pot on the stove, in a rice cooker left on warm for hours, those dormant spores wake up. They begin to multiply, and as they multiply, they release toxins into the rice itself. This is the critical part I need you to understand. The danger isn't the bacteria anymore. It's the toxin they've already produced. When you reheat that rice the next day, you might kill the bacteria. The heat can do that much. But the toxin? It's heat stable. It survives the microwave. It survives the stovetop. It survives boiling, frying, steaming, however you choose to warm it up. You are, in effect, sterilizing the bacteria while leaving their poison completely intact. Clinically, we call the illness that results fried rice syndrome. A name that sounds almost comedic until you've seen a patient suffering from it. Symptoms typically appear within 1 to 5 hours of eating contaminated rice. Nausea, vomiting, abdominal cramping. In more severe cases, diarrhea and dehydration serious enough to require medical attention. Most healthy adults recover within 24 hours, but for young children, elderly patients, or anyone with a compromised immune system, this can escalate into something far more dangerous. And here's what troubles me most as a physician. This isn't rare. It isn't some obscure tropical illness you'll never encounter. It happens in ordinary kitchens to ordinary families because of one simple, invisible mistake. Leaving rice out too long before it ever reaches the fridge. So let me be clear about where the real risk lies. It is not the act of reheating itself. Reheating is not your enemy here. Your enemy is time. Specifically, the time rice spends sitting at room temperature between being cooked and being refrigerated. If you cook a pot of rice and let it sit on the counter for 2, 3, 4 hours before storing it, you have given those bacterial spores exactly the window they need to multiply and release their toxin. By the time you refrigerate it, the damage is already done. No amount of careful reheating the next day will undo it. This is why, in my practice, I tell patients the real rule isn't never reheat rice. The real rule is never let rice sit out. Cooked rice should go into the refrigerator within 1 hour, not the classic 2-hour guideline we use for most foods, but 1 hour because Bacillus cereus multiplies that quickly in rice specifically. Store it in shallow containers so it cools rapidly and evenly, rather than one deep pot where the center stays warm for hours. And when you do reheat it, make sure it's steaming hot all the way through, not just warm around the edges. I also want to address the rice cooker. So many households keep rice warm in the cooker for extended periods, believing the warm setting is protective. It is not. That warm setting often sits in a temperature range, roughly 100 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. That isn't hot enough to kill bacteria, but is perfectly comfortable for them to thrive in. I have seen this exact scenario in my own patient files. Rice kept warm for 6, 8, even 10 hours, eaten the next day, and the family ends up in urgent care wondering what went wrong. Let's move to potatoes. Of all 4 foods on this list, potatoes are the one that surprises people the most. We think of them as safe, starchy, almost boring, the ultimate comfort food. But in my clinical experience, potatoes carry a risk that has nothing to do with the vegetable itself and everything to do with how we store them after cooking. Here's the science behind it. Potatoes, unlike most vegetables, are low in acidity and high in moisture. That combination makes them an ideal environment for a particular type of bacterium, Clostridium botulinum. Now, this name should catch your attention because this is the same organism responsible for botulism, one of the most serious forms of food poisoning we encounter in medicine. Clostridium botulinum has a very specific requirement to thrive. It needs an environment with little to no oxygen. Under normal circumstances, sitting out on a plate exposed to air, this bacterium poses very little threat. But think about how we typically store leftover baked potatoes. We wrap them tightly in aluminum foil, and we leave them at room temperature to cool, sometimes for hours, before ever putting them in the fridge. That foil wrapping does something dangerous. It creates exactly the low-oxygen anaerobic environment that Clostridium botulinum needs to grow and begin producing toxin. And just like the rice we discussed, this isn't a bacterium that heat alone can neutralize once the toxin has formed. The bacteria itself can be killed by reheating. The toxin it releases is far more resilient, and depending on how it's handled, reheating may not be sufficient to break it down completely. The symptoms of botulism are, frankly, some of the most alarming in my field. This isn't simple stomach upset. We're talking about blurred or double vision, difficulty swallowing, muscle weakness, and in severe cases, paralysis that can affect the respiratory system. It is a medical emergency, and it typically develops within 12 to 36 hours after consuming the contaminated food. I want to be clear. Cases tied specifically to home-cooked potatoes are not common, but they are well documented in medical literature, and when they occur, they are severe enough that every physician takes them seriously. So where does the real danger lie? It's not the potato, it's not even the act of baking it. It is, once again, that window of time between cooking and refrigeration, combined with the way we choose to store it. When you bake a potato and wrap it in foil to keep it warm, and then leave that wrapped potato sitting on the counter or even in the oven with the heat off, you are creating a small, sealed, oxygen-poor pocket at a temperature bacteria find perfectly comfortable. The longer that potato sits like that, the more opportunity you're giving for toxin production to begin. In my practice, the guidance I give patients is straightforward. Baked potatoes should never be left wrapped in foil at room temperature for more than 2 hours. And honestly, I push people toward closer to 1 hour, especially in warmer environments. Once the potato has served its purpose at the table, it needs to go into the refrigerator, and ideally, the foil should come off before storage. Wrapping it in the fridge doesn't carry the same risk as leaving it wrapped at room temperature, but removing the foil allows the potato to cool faster and more evenly, which further reduces bacterial opportunity. I also want to mention restaurant-style potato dishes, baked potato bars, potato salads left out at buffets, foil-wrapped potatoes sitting under heat lamps for extended service hours. These scenarios multiply the exact risk factors we've discussed: warmth, low oxygen, and time. If you've ever wondered why certain foodborne illness outbreaks get traced back to potato salad at a summer gathering, this bacterium and this storage mistake are very often the reason. Now let's talk about chicken. Chicken is, without question, the most commonly consumed protein in most households, which is exactly why I want to spend real time on it. It's also, in my clinical experience, one of the foods people are most careless about when it comes to leftovers. Largely because we've been taught that chicken is safe as long as it's cooked thoroughly the first time. But reheating chicken introduces a different category of risk entirely, one that has less to do with bacteria and more to do with what happens to the protein structure itself. Here's what I mean. Chicken is extremely high in protein, and protein is a delicate molecule. When you cook chicken the first time, the proteins denature. They unfold and reorganize under heat. That's a normal, expected part of cooking. But when you cool that chicken, refrigerate it, and then reheat it a second time, you're putting those already altered proteins through another round of structural breakdown. And this is where things get complicated, clinically speaking. Repeated heating can cause proteins to break down into different compounds than what your digestive system was originally prepared to process. In some patients, this triggers what we call a mild digestive intolerance response. Not a true allergy, not food poisoning in the traditional sense, but a kind of protein-level irritation that manifests as bloating, cramping, or general digestive discomfort after eating reheated chicken. I've had patients describe it to me almost apologetically, saying, "I don't understand it, doctor. The chicken wasn't spoiled. It just didn't sit right." And clinically, that description makes sense once you understand what's happening at the molecular level. Beyond the protein breakdown itself, chicken carries an additional layer of risk that compounds this problem: bacterial contamination, specifically from Salmonella and Campylobacter. These bacteria are common on raw poultry, and proper initial cooking does kill them. But chicken is also uniquely vulnerable to what we call the temperature danger zone, that range between 40 and 140 degrees Fahrenheit, where bacteria multiply rapidly. Because chicken is dense and often cut into thick pieces, it cools unevenly. The exterior might feel cool to the touch, while the interior remains in that dangerous temperature range for far longer than people realize, giving any surviving or reintroduced bacteria a window to multiply before it ever reaches the refrigerator. Now, when you reheat that chicken, there's a common mistake I see constantly. People microwave it in short bursts, checking it, stirring it, but never actually bringing the internal temperature high enough or evenly enough to kill off what's grown during storage. Microwaves are notorious for heating unevenly, creating hot spots and cold spots within the same piece of meat. You might bite into a section that's steaming hot, while 2 inches away, the chicken is barely warm, and still harboring bacteria that survive the reheating process entirely. This is compounded further by how many times chicken gets reheated in a typical household. It's rarely just once. Sunday's roast chicken becomes Monday's chicken salad, which becomes Tuesday's chicken soup, which becomes Wednesday's fried rice. And at each stage, that chicken is going through another heating and cooling cycle, another opportunity for protein degradation, another window where it sits in that dangerous temperature zone during preparation. In my practice, I tell patients that chicken should ideally be reheated only once after its initial cooking, not multiple times across several days in several different dishes. When you do reheat it, it needs to reach an internal temperature of at least 165 degrees Fahrenheit, verified with an actual food thermometer rather than guesswork, and it should be heated evenly throughout, not just around the edges. Breaking larger pieces into smaller uniform portions before reheating helps significantly because it allows heat to penetrate consistently rather than leaving a cold, bacteria-friendly center. I also encourage patients to pay attention to their body's signals. If reheated chicken consistently causes digestive discomfort, even when it's been stored and reheated properly, that's valuable information about how your particular digestive system is responding to those altered proteins, and it's worth discussing with your own physician rather than dismissing it as a one-off coincidence. Finally, let's talk about spinach and leafy greens in general. Of all 4 foods on this list, this is the one that catches people most off guard, because we think of spinach as the healthiest thing on the plate. It's the food our parents told us to eat more of. It's iron, it's fiber, it's every nutritionist's favorite example of a superfood. So it feels almost counterintuitive to stand here as a physician and tell you that reheating it can actually work against you. But the chemistry here is real, and it's worth understanding. Spinach, along with beets, celery, and several other leafy or root vegetables, is naturally high in nitrates. In their original form, nitrates aren't dangerous. In fact, in moderate amounts, they're even associated with certain cardiovascular benefits. The problem isn't the nitrates themselves. The problem is what happens to them when spinach is cooked, cooled, stored, and then reheated. When spinach is cooked and then left to sit, whether at room temperature or even in the refrigerator for an extended period, naturally occurring bacteria, along with enzymes still present in the plant tissue, begin converting those nitrates into nitrites. And when you then reheat that spinach, particularly if it's reheated slowly or reheated more than once, that conversion process accelerates further. Nitrites themselves aren't the end of the concern either. Under certain conditions, particularly involving heat and specific amino acids, nitrites can transform into compounds called nitrosamines. Nitrosamines are compounds we watch closely in medicine because they've been studied extensively for their potential links to cellular changes over long-term, repeated exposure. I want to be careful here and not overstate the immediate danger. Eating reheated spinach once will not cause acute illness the way contaminated rice or chicken might. This isn't a same-day urgent care scenario. This is a slower, cumulative concern, the kind of thing I discuss with patients not as an emergency, but as a pattern worth avoiding over months and years of repeated habit. Where this becomes clinically relevant is in households where cooking in bulk is common practice. Spinach gets cooked in a large batch, portioned out, reheated for dinner, reheated again for lunch the next day, sometimes reheated a third time for a following meal. Each cycle of reheating increases nitrite formation a little further. It's not one dramatic exposure. It's the accumulation over repeated meals, repeated weeks, repeated months that concerns me most as a physician looking at long-term patient health. There's also a specific population I want to address directly because the stakes are notably higher for them: infants and young children. Pediatric guidelines have long recommended caution around nitrate-rich vegetables like spinach for babies under 6 months, specifically because infants have a different digestive and blood chemistry that makes them more vulnerable to nitrite-related complications, including a condition called methemoglobinemia, sometimes referred to as blue baby syndrome, where the blood's ability to carry oxygen is compromised. Reheated spinach amplifies this exact risk, which is why so many pediatricians specifically warn against feeding infants spinach that has been cooked, refrigerated, and reheated rather than prepared fresh. So what does this mean practically for you standing in your kitchen tonight? It doesn't mean spinach is dangerous. It doesn't mean you need to fear leafy greens. It means the way we handle them after cooking matters more than most people realize. In my own guidance to patients, I recommend cooking spinach and other nitrate-rich greens in portions close to what you'll actually consume in that sitting, rather than preparing large batches meant for multiple rounds of reheating throughout the week. If you do have leftovers, refrigerate them quickly, within that same 1 to 2 hour window we've discussed with the other foods tonight, and try to consume them within 24 hours rather than stretching them across 3 or 4 days of repeated reheating. I also tell patients, and this applies to beets and celery just as much as spinach, that if you're preparing greens specifically for an infant or toddler, freshness at the time of serving isn't just a preference, it's a genuine safety consideration, and reheated batches should generally be avoided for that age group entirely. Here's your outro. So there you have it. 4 everyday foods sitting in your fridge right now that deserve a second thought before they go back into the microwave. Rice, potatoes, chicken, and spinach. None of them are foods to fear. None of them mean you need to change your entire diet. What they require is awareness, understanding that time, temperature, and storage matter just as much as the cooking itself. As a physician, my goal has never been to alarm you. It's to arm you with the kind of knowledge that keeps you and your family safe, one small kitchen habit at a time. If this information was valuable to you, I'd genuinely appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next conversation like this one. And please, drop a comment below. Tell me which of these 4 surprised you the most. I read every single one. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next video.